The old woman kept up her dignity as a mother-in-law by talking very little, by nodding her commands, and by a general stiffness of demeanor. She is not only missing her mother-in-law, she is also in a complete dilemma, in a confusion, what to do and what not to do. The neighbor's wife came in quietly and cunningly made hole in the wall, stole all the food and vanished in the same manner. Hello, hi, namaste and welcome to Vidhyaashram First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence. I am Nanda Kishore, Faculty of English in Vidhyaashram, MYSURU. In today's session, I am going to discuss one of the pros prescribed to first semester BA and BCA MYSURU University students. The prose is titled as The Clay Mother-in-Law, which is written by A.K. Ramanujan. Let us know something about the author now. The background of this author, A.K. Ramanujan, was born in 1929 in Mysuru and he died in 1998 in Chicago, United States of America. Ramanujan was a well-known Indian poet, short story writer, philologist, folklorist, translator and playwright. Folk tales heard during his childhood days enriched his imagination. Folk tales are nothing but just stories. These are moral stories which are not written but rather told, spread across the people by word of mouth. He was honored with the Sahitya Academy Award and the prestigious Padma Shri Award. Let us straight away get into the prose now. This story is very simple and it has got a moral message to the readers. Once upon a time, all the stories, imaginary stories, it begins with this phrase. Once upon a time, there lived a very docile daughter-in-law who was very down towards earth or very obedient, where a woman would just take the words from her mother-in-law, who was submissive and simple. Docile daughter-in-law, unlike most other daughters-in-law, she was very obedient to her husband's mother and waited upon her slightest wishes. She is very straightforward, very down to earth, very docile, very submissive, not so arrogant. The old woman kept up her dignity as a mother-in-law by talking very little, by nodding her commands and by a general stiffness of demeanor. She kept up her reputation as a mother-in-law by talking very less, not like other mothers-in-law who just go on blabbering, who just blame their daughters-in-law. Every morning, the young housewife came to the old woman and asked her how many measures. It sears the measuring vessel, right? We call it seru, right? Where there is an instrument to measure the rice. How many measures of rice she should cook for that day. Even she would take instruction, command from her mother-in-law, how many cups of rice or how many measures of rice to cook for that particular day. The old woman would ponder over the problem seriously for a while and then hold up her hand. On some days, her hand would show 2 outstretched fingers, on others 3. So, which means you prepare only 2 measures of rice today or 3 measures of rice. According to the dictates of her fancy, the daughter-in-law took the commands silently and went into the kitchen to cook 2 measures or 3 as the wrinkled hand commanded. Wrinkled hand? The old mother-in-law. One day, the old woman fell ill and breathed her last. The young woman, like a good daughter-in-law, wept her eyes out. Even after the mourning was over, she could not see her way about in the house, for she missed her mother-in-law at every step. Such a sincere daughter-in-law, she wept, she cried. Now she started to miss her mother-in-law. Who was there to tell her what to do and when to do it? Who was there to tell her decisively how much she should cook for that day? She was in a perpetual dilemma, unable to take any decision about anything. She is not only missing her mother-in-law, she's also in a complete dilemma, in a confusion, what to do and what not to do. She is in complete dilemma now. She is broken down. Her husband was at first pleased with the devotion of his wife to the memory of her mother-in-law, but soon he was tired of answering her eternal questions about measures of rice. It is about measures of rice now. He is completely fed up. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, maybe a week or a month, but it is eternal questioning. She has not learned how many cups of rice or how to measure the rice and cook for 2 people. So what he does, he thought of way out of all this bother. He went to the nearest potter and ordered a clay image of his mother as large as life. This could be asked for 1 mark. What was the size of the clay image? As large as life. He gave special instructions to the potter. Even this could be asked. He gave special instructions to the potter to make one hand to show 2 fingers, one hand, 2 fingers, and the other 3. It's like 2 and 3. Now, in a few days, the mud mother-in-law was ready for use. He brought the life-size doll home and planted it in a prominent place in the hall. The life-size doll comes home and he plants. It means he keeps in the hall. The devoted housewife was overjoyed at the return of her long-lost mother-in-law. Peace returned to her bosom. She is very happy now. For her was an end to all her daily vexation and problems. It comes to an end now because the statue, the clay mother-in-law, the statue, one is showing 2 and the other hand is showing 3. And what does she do with that? Whenever she was in doubt about measures of rice, she would look out of the kitchen and take the orders. Not by the living mother-in-law, dead clay mother-in-law. If she happened to see the 2-fingered hand first, this is how she took instruction. Even this could be asked. If she happened to see 2-fingered hand first, she would cook 2 measures for the day. If she chanced to glimpse the 3-fingered hand, that day the rice pot would overflow with boiling rice. She was happy with her mud mother-in-law and her husband was happy in the happiness of his wife. Things went on smoothly for a month or 2, but one day the husband discovered that his rice bags were getting emptied every fortnight. Every 12 or 13 days it's getting emptied. And he had to pay for more and more rice, though there were only 2 people in the house. Now here is the confusion. He asked his wife and she told him about her daily procedure, how she asked her mother-in-law every morning and how she followed her instructions. Now what happens? 2 or 3 measures of rice for just 2 of us? Ridiculous. He says, what? 2 or 3 measures of rice just for 2 of us? That's very funny. We certainly aren't eating up all the 2 measures. When my mother was alive, you used to cook the same 2 measures and all the 3 of us would have our bellies bursting. We had plenty with just 2 cups. But now these 2 measures, it's overflowing. He cried in irritation. She replied in a low voice, we are not 2 but 3. Now she says, how come we are 2? No, we are 3. You have forgotten my mother-in-law. As usual, I feed her first before eating anything myself. She is trying to feed a mud mother-in-law. On many days, I have very little to eat. Pardon my saying so. My mother-in-law consumes more rice than she used to. This is very funny now. Husband is so very much triggered. He's so pumped up with rage. The husband became suspicious and as he questioned further, his suspicions deepened. He simply could not believe the fantastic story of a mud mother-in-law guzzling whole bags of rice, gulping down, just like, swallowing in everything. He flew into a rage, beat his wife soundly and threw her out of the house with her mother-in-law. In a sense, with the clay. Now what happens? But the truth about the mud mother-in-law was this. This is the fact. Twice every day, the young wife, according to the custom in South India, spread a leaf before her mother-in-law and served all the dishes one by one. Poor lady. But as soon as she left the hall to resume work in the kitchen, the neighbor's wife came in quietly and cunningly made hole in the wall, stole all the food and vanished in the same manner. By this clever device, she had dispensed with all cooking in her own kitchen. She had just distributed to her family. The poor fool, now who's the poor fool here? The woman, the daughter-in-law, the poor fool all along believed that her mother-in-law had dined off her leaf as usual. Her innocence had now landed her in streets. The unfortunate young woman was miserable. She held the effigy, the statue, the clay model, right? The effigy of her beloved mother-in-law in one arm and walked in the night, cursing her own fate and praying for a swift death. Her face streaming with tears and afraid of the thickening darkness, she walked on and on till she came to a wood just outside the town. She held her mother-in-law closer and shivered in striking wildness. There is nobody around, no life at all. Every sound frightened the poor woman who had never stepped out of her house for years. But terror sharpened her wits, which means the terror is giving her way to think, to find solution for the problem. She somehow climbed a tree and tied herself to an outstretched branch, clinging all the while to her dear departed mother-in-law. As she sat there trembling, to her dismay, she heard loud footfalls. So who is that there? She has climbed up the tree and she is sitting there. Burly mustached men, big mustached men with burning torches in their hands were parting the bushes and coming towards her. By their clothes and murderous looks, she could see that they were thieves. Twigs, the dried branch of the plant or a tree. Twigs broke noisily under their heavy feet as they came right under the tree on which she sat trembling. Right under the tree. Being tired after a busy day, they lowered their burdens from their backs and sat down to share the loot. They are the thieves and they have looted something and they want to distribute. They want to share amongst themselves. The torches burned brightly and lit up their cruel faces weirdly. Shadows played upon the trees as the flames danced and made the wilderness look wilder. The shadow, they are holding the torches. It's making noise and it looks like it is dancing. And that is even more scarier to this daughter-in-law. The poor timid woman on the branches shivered with mortal dread and in a violent tremors, her grip on the clay mother-in-law loosened and down it fell with a great thud. Right on the gang of thieves under the tree. The thieves were seized with panic and took to their heels, flying in all directions before they knew what happened. So she was shivering and she loosened her grip and just this clay mother-in-law model, it just fell right in front of them with great thud and they thought that it is something at that moment during the night, it's something scarier and they left the loot there and ran helter-skelter. As a precious doll fell from her hands, she fainted in sheer terror and lay unconscious among the branches till the next morning. So we don't know what's going to happen next. So that is it for today's session. I'm going to continue this session, this prose in my next class. I'm going to meet you in my next session. Until then, keep reading. Have a good day. Take care.